Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Just the Facts Town Hall virtual edition brought to you by Talk About It America. My name is Amy, and I'm going to be one of the co-presenters for this presentation today. I'm a mom, an activist, an advocate, a bill writer, a former House candidate, and I am so excited to be here with you.
And my name is Tonya, and I am also an advocate and an organizer, and I have also been a teacher for the last 18 years.
This event is hosted by Talk About It America. It's a nonpartisan group committed to clearing the noise and creating real conversations around the kinds of bills that shape our lives. The big, the complicated, controversial, and essential ones just like this. Now, if you're looking at the screen and you are confused about the One Big Beautiful Bill, aka the OBBB, which does sound like a Broadway musical, it's actually a piece of federal legislation with very real impacts. And so we wanted to break it down. Tonya and I created this slideshow, and it doesn't touch on everything, but it does touch on some of the biggest aspects of it. Now, as of today, as of June 25th at 7:23 p.m., this is current. However, everything is still going through the Senate at this time, so things could change in terms of what has been removed due to the Byrd Rule and what provisions are still being challenged. So, before we jump in, sometimes policy can remind us of being a kid with a juice box. You ask for orange, they hand you apple, and you say, "Hey, this isn't what I asked for." And they say, "Well, technically it's fruit." And that is how some parts of this bill might feel for you, regardless of party. So tonight we are here to figure out what's actually in the juice box. So we are going to present the One Big Beautiful Bill in a nonpartisan manner that is accessible for everyone. So before we move on, we just wanted to make sure that that was there. I'm not going to go through any of the regular housekeeping stuff that we would for a live event. I'm so sorry you missed it. It was great. We had a lot of live panelists and a lot of great conversations, but hopefully you will be satisfied with the slideshow. If not, let us know and we'll re-record. And with that, I guess Tonya, let's take it away. Let's go ahead and start.
Let's do this.
All right, so let's start with the One Big Beautiful Bill and what in the world it is. No, it's not a boy band group or a Broadway musical. I know I made that joke before, and I'm still holding to it. The One Big Beautiful Bill is a 1,118-page bill that is comprised of 32 separate bills. It is endorsed by President Trump, and it passed in the House with only Republican votes. So I also want to point out that you'll see it on the screen. It only passed by one vote, one singular vote. So, and the vote was had at 1 a.m. So it was not done in clear daylight. It was done overnight, and we woke up in the morning to find the results of this bill. Now the bill is in the Senate right now, and that's where we're at. All right, so now I want to talk about the Byrd Rule. Now, most Senate bills need 60 votes, but budget bills, called reconciliation bills, only need 50. The Byrd Rule limits these 50-vote bills to items only affecting spending or revenue, and it can't add to deficits beyond 10 years. Non-budget items must be removed, and some parts of the bill must be temporary, so they don't add to deficits beyond 10 years. In simple terms, for reconciliation bills, the Byrd Rule says you can't sneak in unrelated stuff that has nothing to do with the budget or add to deficits beyond 10 years. And if you try, those provisions can be challenged and removed. And I want to say, two more things. Number one, you'll see at that bottom where it said it can be removed. Byrd Rule challenges can be made by senators, but they can also be made by the parliamentarian. So right now in the Senate, the parliamentarian struck with the mighty pen and said, there were a handful of provisions that violated the Byrd Rule, and it was her suggestion that they be removed. Senators also have the power to challenge provisions in a reconciliation bill under the Byrd Rule. Because reconciliation bills are not eligible for filibuster, we have seen it before where chambers throw everything together into one, violating the Byrd rule because it's a quick way to get it through, because of that inability to participate in the filibuster. Now, challenging a provision under the Byrd rule. So you'll see all of them on the screen right here. The two in blue are the ones that are applicable currently from the One Big Beautiful Bill. But these are the parameters for challenging a provision. So it doesn't change spending or revenue, increases the deficit beyond the budget window, is outside the jurisdiction of the committee handling the bill, has a budgetary effect that is quote unquote merely coincidental to its non-budgetary components, or if it makes changes to Social Security. So what is impacted by the bill? You'll see it on the screen, and for goodness sake, because we care about your sanity and your mental health, we are not going to go through all of them in this slideshow. However, if you would like us to go through each of these, leave us a comment, send us an email, write it in smoke in the sky. We'll see it, and we will make a video on it. But we will be talking about some of these. So we'll be talking about Medicaid, we'll be talking about SNAP, Planned Parenthood, AI regulation, border funding, overtime and tip taxes, clean energy credits. These are just the judicial enforcement. So we'll be talking about some of these. But like I said, we care about you, so we're not going to go through all of them because that would be a 5-hour presentation. But again, let us know.
So one of the most important ones is SNAP. SNAP is otherwise known as food stamps, so let's get into it. SNAP provides food assistance to low-income families so they have enough food to eat. Now, when you think about SNAP, you're not talking about a 5-course meal. What you're talking about is, on average, about $6 a day. In 2024, there are about 41 million people on SNAP benefits in the United States, which is a lot of people. In Florida, which is where we're located, it was around 3 million. Again, a lot of people. More importantly is how many of these are kids. About 40% of SNAP benefits go directly to kids. All right, now something that you're going to hear a lot about, because we're talking about money that is given by the government to people. So what we're going to hear a lot about is something called the multiplier effect. What the multiplier effect does is it measures how much economic activity increases for every dollar of government spending. So basically, if the government is giving you money, does the economy benefit from that? And what we found with SNAP is that the government benefits a whole bunch from it. So SNAP puts $1.50 to $1.80 back into the economy for every dollar invested. So how does that happen? The way it happens is that those people are using that money really quickly. So they're going to spend the money at their local grocery store. What that means is that the local grocery store will have to hire more workers. Okay, they'll also have to order more inventory, which means that distributors can send out more trucks, and farmers, especially local producers, can sell more of their goods. And each step is going to generate more rounds of economic spending. Now, not only that, but it also means that people are literally going to have enough food in their bellies. And when people have enough food in their bellies, they're more productive. They are less likely to be absent from work. So there's a whole lot of benefits there. So let's talk about the changes that are going to happen to SNAP. There's a law that's going to adjust SNAP. Currently, there's a law that adjusts SNAP benefits to the cost of living every 5 years. They eliminate it. They're also, and this one's one of the big ones, they're going to make states pay 5 to 25% of SNAP costs. This kind of depends on a couple of things, their error rates and things like that. But currently, the federal government pays all of the SNAP direct costs. In 1996, there was a work requirement that began applying to SNAP benefits. And currently, people who are considered to be able-bodied without dependence or disability are required to work 80 hours per month if they're between the ages of 18 and 54. This would raise that maximum age to 64. And uh, the dependence clause there. So dependents right now are children under the age of 18. In this case, to get the work waiver, dependents would be defined as children under 7 years old. So a 6-year-old is dependent, a 7-year-old isn't. Again, this is the House bill that we're talking about here. So an example of how this would impact a real person is if you are a single mother, you live in Waldo, Florida, you get SNAP benefits to support you and your kids. Let's say your kids are 9 and 10 years old. You don't meet the work requirements. With this policy change, the mother would be subject to work requirements, which if she can't do it because she can't work 80 hours a week, because maybe she has childcare issues or childcare is too expensive, they could literally lose their ability to get enough food. This would also apply to her 59-year-old mother. This bill is the largest cut to SNAP benefits ever. It cut SNAP by up to $295 billion, which is about 30% of the overall program.
And that's with a B, not an M.
A B. These changes would begin between October of 2026 and October of 2027. Now, we're doing this slideshow on the 25th of June, so there aren't that many pieces of the Senate bill that have been released, but we have gotten some things from it. And so this is what we found. A couple things are a little bit better. So now a dependent actually is a kid who's 9 years old, though a 10-year-old is still not considered to be a dependent. And this one is a very good thing. States no longer would have to pay for the direct SNAP costs. And this is because it's not allowed by the parliamentarian under the Byrd rule. So those two make it a little bit better than the House bill. However, it does force veterans to meet SNAP work requirements. So right now, veterans and a couple other groups have an exemption from those work requirements. These people fought for our country. They can get SNAP benefits if they need them. The House kept those current, and the Senate bill doesn't.
I'm pretty sure that veterans have already put in their time working.
I agree.
And also, 9 years, 11 months, and 29 days, you're considered a child. And at 10, I guess you're paying taxes and working. That's wild. So, not okay. All right, so now we're going to transfer over to Medicaid. So, Medicaid is a government run health insurance program for pregnant women, children, people with disabilities, low income adults, and seniors, 62% of nursing home residents. Medicaid makes up around 30% of state expenditures. So I know Tonya just talked about this a little bit, but Medicaid also exhibits that multiplier effect. So Medicaid spending generates $1.35 to $2 into the economy for every dollar spent. Now you're going to see a very organized graph in the middle of your screen. Those are Medicaid enrollment numbers by county and region. If you click the hyperlink, you can actually open up the Excel worksheet and it will show you everything. But I want to draw your attention to a couple of these numbers. Marion County, for example, 88,846 enrollees. Duval, 222,098. Volusia, 104,214. Gilchrist is 4,663. Levy, 10,877. And that's not all of them, but just us in our neighboring counties. Like, look at how many people use this safety net.
And let's also talk about why the multiplier effect is so high here.
I mean, yeah, if you are sick and you cannot go to the doctor or get the care that you need, I don't think you're going to be able to work.
Not going to be the most productive person ever?
Probably not.
No.
It seems like it's better for the bottom line for our economy, but it might just be a little bit more ethical to treat people with human dignity and allow them to have medical care. All right, so some Medicaid changes. There's now federal work requirements. It repeals the laws that made it easier to enroll or renew coverage. So now you have to renew every year. And You must renew enrollment twice as often. So, like I just said, every year.
It used to be once a year currently, and now it's be every 6 months.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's yeah. It's when you think about the people that are going through this, the people that need Medicaid, the people that are using these services. I mean, when I was on Medicaid, I know so many people that didn't even have access to internet, and to think that we're going to force them, people that already don't have the resources they need to be level with everybody else, and then force them to
It's pretty obvious what's going to happen, isn't it?
it kills me. $880 billion in proposed cuts. 10.9 million will lose direct coverage. $7.8 million due to new requirements for direct Medicaid recipients, 3.1 million due to new requirements for those with Medicaid expansion from the ACA marketplace. The bigger changes begin in 2029.
After the next presidential election.
Coincidental? I think not. All right, so this one's really important. We're going to talk about Medicaid work requirements, but we've done this. We've been there, done that. We've tried this before, and it doesn't work. In 2018, the Trump administration allowed Arkansas to enact Medicaid work requirements, and 25% of enrollees subject to work requirements lost coverage. Most who lost coverage were qualified. They filled out the paperwork incorrectly, and there's no evidence that it increased the number of people with jobs. New enrollees had large delays getting coverage because of the excessive paperwork, or because their paperwork wasn't filled out properly, and that led to much higher administrative costs for the state. Estimates are that federal Medicaid work requirements will lead to 15,400 avoidable deaths each year. Now, I just want to touch base before we go to the next slide that when we saw this done in Arkansas, I mean, lives were lost then, and it was just one state. And on the next slide, we're going to see how many avoidable deaths there are.
How much value does life have?
More than you can put in numbers. Projected losses per state, and actually, I'll go back. They try to quantify human life in cases all the time, but the numbers are never the same because every human being is different. So, I mean, I think that shows that you can't put a number on the value of someone's life, and unfortunately we try to all the time. Okay, so this slide, projected losses per state for Medicaid work expansion. These are the states that are part of that Medicaid work expansion. We are not one of them. So Florida is not on this list, but you'll see some of these bigger numbers. I mean, golly, look at California. 1.1 million enrollees losing coverage, 3,481 lives lost per year. My God. Illinois, 653 avoidable deaths. Indiana, 345.
Arizona, 562.
Even Alaska, 33. Like, that's wild. That's wild. Those are completely avoidable. I think we need to respect that not everyone has the same access to resources, and when we don't have the same access to resources, we should be supporting those who need the assistance so that they can go out into the workplace, so that they can earn more money and provide for their family. So that way we're not using, costs for Medicaid because they have to go to the doctor, and we're not having to apply for these programs because we are being treated well enough to make it on our own. And it's such a systemic problem. And we're cutting off the Band-Aids.
And that was one thing that Arkansas found, was that people wanted to work, but when they lost Medicaid, they lost the ability to get the medication that allowed them to be productive members of society.
Yeah.
And that can take a toll on a person. And once you lose that, it's really hard for those who have the least to get back what they had previously.
Yeah. All right. This bill does not address increased ACA tax credits. So in 2021, the American Rescue Plan increased marketplace tax credits. These increased tax credits end December 31st, 2025. Now, they've been renewed twice already. If extended, this will be the third time. And if not extended, health insurance costs will increase significantly for 22 million people, especially in states like Florida, without the Medicaid expansion. So 4.2 million people will be uninsured by 2034. Premiums could increase by up to 93%, which means that plans could go up by almost $900 a month. Now, I have one of these plans, and my bill, if it goes up 93%, will be almost $1,000 a month.
Yeah. And then what's going to happen? You can't afford it. And then what's going to happen?
Honestly, what I think will happen is more people will apply for disability just so they have the funds to pay for their medical insurance. But again, we talk about that multiplier effect. If they're on disability, they're not working. So we're not putting that money into the economy.
So the best way to spend that money is really to put it in Medicaid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if federal funds for Medicaid expansion drop below 90%, some states will get rid of it, and another estimated 3.6 million will lose healthcare coverage altogether.
In fact, it's a trigger law where they have to get rid of it if it drops below 90%.
Absolutely. Now, more than 16 million people could lose healthcare coverage through direct Medicaid cuts and failure to extend ACA tax credits. All right, now I want to talk about the Senate Medicaid differences. So what we just talked about was the House version. Now, this version has even deeper Medicaid cuts. And with the cuts that they're proposing, 2 million people and potentially more will be at risk, or they'll lose Medicaid. So now I want to go to these points here. The Senate Medicaid differences. The first thing, it extends work requirements to low-income parents of school-age kids, a group mostly exempt under the House bill. Like the House bill, this fails to extend expanded ACA tax credits. And in Medicaid expansion states, the bill gradually lowers state taxes on hospitals and similar facilities used to fund Medicaid. It penalizes states that expanded Medicaid.
Oh boy.
Now, before I move on to the next subject, I want to put things in a little bit more of the human aspect. And I want to share a little bit about my story, because I want, when you consider this cut, I want you to be able to think of a story and relate it, because it is so important that we humanize this a little bit. Now, this section hits a little close to home for me. I was a young single mom. I had my first when I was 20. I was 19 when I got pregnant. I was on Medicaid, SNAP, ELC, you name it. And when my youngest was born, he had fluid in his kidneys. And that meant constant visits to our local hospital, Shands, scans, tests, specialists, all the time. And every single time we'd get the Medicaid paperwork afterward, we'd get the bill, and each appointment was thousands of dollars. And every time, we whisper a quick thank you to the universe because we had Medicaid. I exhaled because he had hope, because he could see the specialist that we needed, because there was no version of my life, no job, no amount of hustle that could have covered that kind of care out of pocket. Because social welfare, especially SNAP and especially Medicaid, was the only reason that we were surviving. Now, one day, without warning or explanation, we were dropped for a few months. It was just gone. And we found out when we tried to check into an appointment. And now those bills, they came to me. They landed on my lap, and I had to pay them. Or he wouldn't get his meds. He wouldn't get the care he needed. He wouldn't get his scans. And these bills were on top of rent, on top of utilities, on top of daycare and school and aftercare, on top of the babysitter I needed just to keep those 3 jobs. Without Medicaid, we didn't just fall through the cracks. We hit rock bottom and kept falling. Now, I was already barely holding it together before we lost it, and after we did, it shattered everything. I was already stretching every dollar, juggling schedules, keeping the lights on somehow, and feeding my kids by a thread. I couldn't take sick days. I worked through family deaths, broken bones, pneumonia, and everything else. I didn't have family around to support me. I was entirely on my own. And I did everything I could. I went without meals. I brought home the messed up orders and reorders or soup from work so my kids could eat. I rotated which bills I could pay that month and prayed that None of them would shut off. I learned 20 ways to stretch a box of rice and beans or mac and cheese, and I still had days with empty cabinets or empty fridge. But my kids never knew. Um, my kids never knew. So here's the thing: I wasn't lazy, I wasn't irresponsible, I wasn't illegal. I was a mom, like so many other parents and individuals who are doing everything they possibly can, and it's still not enough. And that's who gets hit when these programs are cut. Not just statistics, not just talking points, real people in real crisis, holding it together with duct tape and a little bit of hope. Parents, grandparents, kids who get sick. And if this safety net goes away, if the people that we elected take programs like these, it's not just policy failure anymore. It's life or death. People will die, period. And that's not hyperbole. That's just what happens when care becomes unaffordable and out of reach. It's the difference between kids like mine getting the care that they need or not making it at all. It is the difference between eating or not. Now, I got through it, but it wasn't sustainable. Hell, I developed I developed ulcers and an autoimmune disease from the stress of it. And if my son hadn't gotten better, if we hadn't clawed our way up out of that hole, he might not be here. Now, I tell this story not to make you uncomfortable, but I want to make it real because bills don't just live in Congress, they live in our kitchen, our hospitals, our grocery stores, our dinner tables. And if we don't talk about it, we let those stories disappear. And I know that I'm not the only one in this slideshow right now who's lived this. Maybe not the exact same story, but the struggle, that constant push to provide, to protect, to survive. That's something many of us know all too well. And if you've never had to live it, I just ask that you hold space for it because someone in your community, maybe someone watching this with you, is carrying that weight right now. So with that, I appreciate you holding on while I shared that story. I hope that it makes things a little bit more relatable and a little bit more human to you. These policies that we're talking about in this bill, um, there's 16 million people with stories like mine. All right, now we're gonna move to women's health.
Another pretty heavy one.
Another heavy one. I won't give you a long testimony on this one though. All right, so changes in both House and Senate bills. Now, before I give you the stats here, I do want to talk about the Hyde Amendment. A lot of conversations that are swirling around are that this particular provision in the bill is because federal dollars should not be used to fund abortions. However, it doesn't do that. The Hyde Amendment already bans federal dollars from funding abortions. So when we look at this provision at House Section 44-126, this is not for the prevention of abortions being funded by federal dollars. This specifically talks about defunding clinics that are providing other services. So I just want to start out by saying that. So House Section 44-126 prohibits federal Medicaid payments to nonprofit healthcare providers, which receives more than $1 million in Medicaid funds, primarily provides family planning or reproductive services, or performs abortions beyond the cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. Planned Parenthood clinics would likely lose all Medicaid funding for services, including contraception, cancer screenings, STD testings, pregnancy care, etc. I mean, over 2.5 million women would lose their primary health provider, and it would increase our deficit by $300 million over 10 years. And yeah, I will also say, 19 years old, I definitely used Planned Parenthood to find out I was pregnant. So, and then afterwards, I used them to get all of the contraceptions, all the contraceptives I needed. Holy cow! All right, so let's talk about what Planned Parenthood does. This also exhibits the multiplier effect, by the way. So I want you to take a look at this wheel on the left side, or this pie chart, I guess. It's been a minute since I've been in like 8th grade math. That took a second. Let's look at that chart. So you're going to see STD testing and treatment is literally half of it. It's 50.7%. Contraception is 24.6%. That's the orange. The green is 3.6%. It's UTIs, primary care, etc. The blue is your cancer screenings, that's 5.1%. And that purple, it's a really pretty shade of purple, is your preventative care, your prenatal and miscarriage care. That's 11.7%. I want you to take a look at that tiny little sliver, that yellow sliver over there, 4.3%. That is how many abortions Planned Parenthood does. 4.3%. 95% of Planned Parenthood services are for non-abortive health care. I also want to add that there have been many studies done, and around 76% of the public supports what Planned Parenthood does outside of abortions. They support Planned Parenthood clinics for being used for those other purposes, and you'll see that's 95%. So let's go back to that multiplier effect. For every federal dollar spent on Planned Parenthood services, the government saves $7.09. 32% of women and 11% of men have used Planned Parenthood for services. The presence of clinics decreases the number of abortions due to the availability of contraception. It's very similar to the Medicaid and the SNAP examples that we were talking about. If we're able to provide a teenager with a condom, we save a lot more money by not having to pay for pregnancy care and postpartum care and then all of the necessities she'll need after she gives birth.
Because when people are able to control when they have children, then they're less reliant on social services.
Absolutely. We can be more effective when we have a choice in how we go about our day to day, and having the ability to find out if you have an STD from sexual activity before you get it can help with prevention of later accumulation of disease. It can also help with ensuring that you get the treatment right away so you don't have negative health implications down the road. It's the same thing with, the preventative care, prenatal miscarriage care, being able to find out, how not to be pregnant and what to do if you do get pregnant. That is that multiplier effect that determines how you're able to move forward in a healthy way.
All right, now we're going to switch a little bit because now the kids have gotten older and we're on education policy. So this one, there's a little bit of news that's broken lately, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about the House bill. So the House bill did a lot of stuff to education, which was a little bit concerning. It reduced the authority of the DOE, the Department of Education, to make decisions about education policy. Basically, everything had to run through the Office of Management and Budget, and they had to stamp approval of everything. It also required higher credit requirements on Pell Grants and decreased the grant amounts. It also eliminated subsidized student loans, which means that the government would no longer pay the interest on loans when students were in school. And it eliminated most of the more generous options for loan repayment. All right, so let's talk about the good news on the Senate side. The Senate bill, thankfully, keeps the subsidized loans, it keeps the Pell Grants, and it keeps the DOE authority. However, it still makes it harder to repay student loans. So in this education section, on the House side, there were about $350 billion worth of cuts. However, on the Senate side, because it still takes away all of those different options on repaying student loans, on loan forgiveness, on the amounts that they have to pay when there's a hardship, it still ends up cutting $300 billion. And so it just makes it harder for students who might struggle to repay for their education to do so. All right, now we're going to take another switch to climate, energy, EPA, and NOAA.
Say that 3 times fast.
I don't think I can. How about in honor of that, I'll do the first part and you do the second part.
Hard.
All right, so basically the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, it did a whole bunch of stuff to make our country gear itself into clean energy, okay? Because a whole bunch of countries are in competition right now in order to be the clean energy place of the future, or to kind of come up with all of the inventions for clean energy to switch over as fast as possible. We wanted to be a part of that. In fact, we wanted to win that race. This takes a lot of that away. So first, what it does do, it makes it easier to get permitting and leasing contracts for coal, oil, and natural gas. It also makes it easier to build oil and gas pipelines. However, it takes back a whole bunch of money from the IRA. In fact, most of the IRA stuff it gets rid of. So let's talk about it. It takes back money not yet used for energy projects in the IRA. It removes caps on mercury and greenhouse emissions. It repeals clean energy initiatives. So, for example, you could get tax credits for solar panels, for wind, for batteries. You could even get tax credits for buying an electric car. And now you can't. With this bill, you can't. And this is both on the House side and the Senate side. It also gets rid of emission regulations.
They really were like climate change, everything. We pressed Control F to find everything that said climate, and we erased it all.
Yes. And it, of course, also eliminates incentives available to update to more efficient appliances. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what this does is it switches from incentivizing clean energy economy to kind of get at the forefront of that back to fossil fuel dependence. And it's going to cost us. In fact, it's estimated to cost us 830,000 clean energy jobs, most of them in red states. It's also going to result in higher energy costs. If we can't get more efficient appliances with these tax credits, then our homes are going to be spending more energy or using more energy. On average, it could increase energy rates by about $230 per household per year. It's going to slow the transition to renewables. And remember how we said there's race. It's going to allow other countries to get ahead. And of course, it's
China
also
will love that.
They will. And it's going to make pollution worse.
All right, I'm going to talk about the cuts to the EPA and to the NOAA. This bill eliminates EPA grants from the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. And the IRA funded replacing high emission heavy vehicles with zero emission ones, reducing air pollution and ports, funding private investment in clean energy in disadvantaged communities, and monitoring and reducing air pollution in cities and low income schools. There is approximately $100 billion with a B in EPA cuts over the next 10 years. And let's talk about NOAA, that pretty blue box.
Did I mention we're in Florida?
We are in one of the coastal communities that will be impacted by this.
Didn't we have 3 last year, or was it 4?
I lost count. Each one, I was like, am I dying today? How many cases of toilet paper did I purchase? How many gallons of water? How many cans of SpaghettiOs can one person eat and then survive?
How many trees are going to fall down for this one?
I just cut them all and was like, the homeowners association can come after me later.
How many tree limbs are going to be picked up before the next one?
Listen, I told my children it was werewolves outside instead of a natural disaster, so they panicked less. Because they still think that werewolves look like Jacob from Twilight.
I thought they'd like it then.
Yeah. Okay. So this bill rescinds unused money from the IRA dedicated to NOAA, which funded extreme storm preparedness. So those hurricanes. It cuts an estimated $1.5 billion, again with the B, from hurricane warning systems, climate research, and coastal resilience. Experts warn that this could weaken the country's ability to respond to extreme weather events. So what does this mean? This means that there is less staff dedicated or available to be dedicated to researching the pattern of major storms, where they're going, where they're heading, how strong they are. And that's really scary, because if you live in Florida and you have seen some of these hurricanes, not knowing when or where or how strong they are, it's a terrifying thing to not know how prepared you need to be, or if you need to get the heck out of Dodge. All right, so this next one, judicial enforcement. This is the scariest thing. we have a document called the Constitution. And in the United States Constitution, one of the really great protections it provides is separations of power. So we have checks and balances uh, that that reinforces these separations of power to make sure that one branch can't unilaterally rule or make decisions, and that we have other branches to balance everything out. This section of the bill threatens that. It threatens that separation of power, that check, that balance. And it does so by making changes to judicial enforcement and how they can respond in cases. So, with this bill, the federal government cannot be punished for breaking a court order unless the suing party has already paid a bond when the order was issued. The federal government can ignore lower court orders until the Supreme Court weighs in, and it also applies to court orders retroactively. Now, before I continue, I just want to explain this a little bit. So, most cases against the government are civil, and civil cases typically do not require bonds. That is a criminal case. Criminal courts, criminal law, those have bonds, and those bonds dictate whether or not um, an alleged perpetrator can stay in custody or whether they can go home. 97% of the court cases against Donald Trump right now are civil. They are not federal. So requiring a bond is new territory. There's not really precedent for this. Now, this is also a huge source of inequity and resources, because if there is a suing party that does not have the means to put forward a bond that the court deems is appropriate, or the language is appropriate, um, then there's no way to enforce any court order. So that means a party can sue the administration, and unless they have the money put forward in advance for a bond, the judge can all day long, give a ruling, and they can try to order contempt, but they can't enforce that contempt. And that is where the problem is when you can't enforce your ruling, your teeth have been effectively removed, and that branch of government no longer really has that power, or has power of enforcement. The fact that this also applies to court orders retroactively means that thousands of cases are kind of moot and point. Um, so an example here, so there's a new DOE rule that says schools don't have to provide one-on-one aids to certain students with disabilities. Now, the courts can rule in favor of the parents, but they couldn't hold the federal government in contempt if they ignore the ruling. And again, it doesn't, in this case, it doesn't look like there was a bond put forward. And because there was no bond, the courts cannot enforce that contempt order, and the federal government can ignore any ruling made by a court. It's the same thing with ICE agents. If ICE agents detain immigrants with protective status, same thing. If there's no bond put forward, the immigrants with protective status, on behalf of themselves or any attorneys that they put forward, if they don't have the funds put up in advance, ICE agents can detain whoever they want because there's no contempt order with teeth. There's nothing to physically hold them to that court order. The Senate version of this only applies to the preliminary rulings, so the things made in advance, or in the first stage. I don't want to say in advance, in the first stage of a case. But because of all these things, you can see my concern. To the challenge that this will present for us to maintain three separate branches with equal power.
Yeah. Now, this one, we have a little bit of good news on the CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Thank you, Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you, Elizabeth Warren. And that's because of the Byrd Rule. So let's talk about it real quick. CFPB is an independent agency set up in 2010 in response to the 2008 financial crisis to protect consumers from abusive financial practices. And it's done that really successfully. It's returned almost $20 billion with a B to consumers as of January of this year. House changes say that the CFPB will need congressional budget approval. Obviously, if you have a financial institution that's being investigated that funds a congressional member, that might make them not want to enact the CFPB rules that they otherwise would have. Unused civil penalties would be returned to the Treasury instead of going directly to consumers, and it would cut the funding for it by 70%. Thankfully, the Senate bill drops these cuts because the parliamentarian ruled that it didn't pass the Byrd rule. So we're going to kind of take a deep breath because this one we think is not going to be there. All right. But now let's talk about one that is, and that is taxes. All right. So, tax changes. This makes permanent the reduced income tax rates from the 2017 Trump tax cuts, all of them. It makes permanent and expands the estate and gift tax cuts to $15 million per person. That means that, Amy, if I had it, I could gift you $15 million.
Thank you so much.
Without you having to pay any taxes.
I love that. I'm going to go on a cruise.
Now, anything above that 15 million, you would have to pay 40% on, but you got 15. It also makes permanent the expanded qualified business income tax deductions, which are going to be things like S-corps and sole proprietorships and partnerships. Basically, pass-through businesses, and the House bill actually boosts that deduction. The Senate bill doesn't. And it temporarily raises the tax deduction for seniors that are 65 plus. In the House, it raises it by $4,000. Senate raises it by $6,000. Now, if you know most 65 plus year olds, they're not making that much money. And in fact, most seniors, about 60%, won't benefit at all from this because they don't pay federal income taxes. Ones that will benefit, of course, are senators who are 65 plus and House members who are 65 plus.
So like all of them?
Yeah, a lot. Now we're going to talk about the expanded child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit is going to go up in the House bill from $2,000 a year to $2,500 a year through 2028, which is a great thing for a lot of people. However, about 20 million children that have working class families would get less than the full $2,500 credit. It's a pretty complicated formula. Basically, after you make $2,500, you get $15 for every 100. But basically what this means is that a single parent of two young children making $16,000 a year would get around $1,125 per child, whereas a married couple with two kids and a combined income of $300,000 a year would get the full $2,500 per child. In the Senate bill, the child tax credit is similar. However, it's a little bit less. It's $2,200 a child. All right. Temporary tax changes for tips and overtime. I'm not going to talk about the Senate version. There's a couple little things that are different, but it's pretty much the same. No tax on tips. This is one of Trump's big proposals for people earning under $160,000. It's not super controversial. In fact, a similar bill passed the Senate with unanimous consent earlier this year. It costs the government about $4 billion a year. However, the only concern is that about 37% of tipped workers don't owe federal income taxes. The next one we're going to talk about is no tax on overtime. Again, they're pretty much the same in the House and the Senate. It's also for people earning under $160,000. It costs the government about $16 billion a year, a little bit more than the TAPES one. And the main concern is that vague rules could be exploited by high income earners. So, for example, a business owner could legally employ their college-age child, pay them $25,000 in overtime for summer work, and the child could deduct the full amount. Again, this one's temporary, so it would also expire in 2028.
But that provision alone adds 20 billion dollars to the deficit.
Yeah, almost. All right, let's do tax changes by the numbers. Now, we only have these numbers for the House bill. We don't have them for the Senate bill, and the reason why should be pretty obvious. The reason why is because the Senate hasn't gotten through it yet, and they don't have these numbers yet. But they're probably going to be pretty close. If you make $5 million a year, you're in luck. You get about $300,000 back. If you make $1 million a year, you get about $22,000 in tax cuts. If you make $50,000, you get about $815,000, and if you make $20,000 a year, you get about $160,000. This one I think is probably the most important slide about tax changes because it really kind of highlights who gets what. And when you put it together with the other slides that we've done, it really shows what's going on. The impact of the tax changes is it increased the deficits by up to $3.8 trillion over the next 10 years. It stimulates the economy by about 0.4%, which is around the equivalent of a $150 billion to $200 billion infrastructure bill. But it cost $3.8 trillion instead of $200 billion. And the economic growth from the cuts would account for approximately 6% of the cost. In May, Moody's lowered the U.S. credit rating due to concerns about the government's ability to manage its debt. And this is another thing because it impacts everyone. If we have higher debt, we're going to have higher interest rates. The reason why is because the way that you finance your debt is you have people buy bonds. Okay. If you have to sell more bonds, you're going to have to raise interest rates because that's the only way that those people are going to buy those bonds. And the more bonds you have, the more you have to incentivize, the higher those interest rates have to be. But those interest rates are not just going to be high for the bondholders. They're also going to be high for everyone else. So if you have a credit card that you have to pay interest on, that interest is going to be higher. Mortgage rates are going to go up. Car loans are going to go up. So it's going to impact everyone. In fact, it's estimated that over the next 10 years, nearly 1 in every $5 will go to bondholders as interest instead of services or tax relief. So there's been a lot of discussion on if these tax cuts could actually stimulate the economy so much that they pay for themselves. Is that true? Well, if a tax cut for a certain person can pay for itself, actually has a lot more to do with which person is getting the tax cut. So let's talk about it. Remember how we talked a lot about multiplier effects? We're still going with the multiplier effects. So let's talk about a family of 4. This is a low-income household. They're making under $50,000 a year. They do have a multiplier effect. Guess what? That means that that tax cut is going to pay for itself. In fact, the multiplier effect is $1.10 to $1.50 for every dollar in tax cuts. And the reason why is because they're going to spend their tax savings for their immediate needs. Okay, it's going to go directly back into the economy, and then it's going to fund more jobs so that more people have work, more people have more money, just like the other multiplier effects we talked about. Now let's talk about middle incomes. Middle income households for a family of 4 would be between $50,000 and $150,000. The multiplier effect is between 80 cents and $1.20 for every dollar in tax cuts. The reason why is because they spend a lot of it immediately, but some may save. So would these pay for themselves? Yeah, but not as much as for the lower income households. Now let's talk about high income households. These are considered to be over $150,000 a year. These don't. For every dollar in tax cuts, the economy would get between 20 and 40 cents. The reason why is because for these households, most of the money is going to be saved or invested. It's not going to be spent in the economy. So, because so much of these tax cuts go to people who make over $150,000 a year, the answer is no. When these people get these tax cuts, it's not going to go back into the economy. In fact, it's going to do the opposite.
So, in just to break it down, that means that people that have less money are using every penny that they have because they have to. And the people that make astronomical amounts of money, at least comparatively, they don't have the need to spend every penny that they have. They have enough to save and put aside.
Exactly.
All right, now I'm going to talk about a pretty big one. We're going to talk about the biggest investment into national security and border funding that we have seen in our lifetime. We're going to talk about the national security and border funding in the One Big Beautiful Bill. You are going to see a lot of things on this screen. There are 10 things. You're going to see $45 billion to expand detention centers to allow for up to 100,000 detainees in one location. $46.5 billion for the border wall, $4.1 billion for ICE and BP, or Border Patrol recruitment. So this is signing bonuses and raises and bonuses. So all of those things for our current ICE and BP recruitment. $2.8 billion for border security tech, $500 million for AI cybersecurity. We're going to look at $40 billion for new military equipment. That's not just uniforms, but new planes, new weaponry, you name it, new drones. $24.7 billion for the Golden Dome. Do you want to tell them what the Golden Dome is?
I'll tell them about Israel's. Israel is a small country, and it feels like it's pretty threatened on all sides. So it has like anti-aircraft guns
Yep.
That kind of defend the whole country. So if missiles come at it, it can defend itself. However, I think we can both agree that the United States is a lot larger than Israel. So go ahead, take it away. Golden Dome.
I just kind of think of Austin Powers. Is that wrong? And I just think of, if you come to me, I shoot you down.
Yeah. Maybe like a big bowl.
Yeah, it's like a big mixing bowl that they are going to throw on top of the United States to protect us, to ensure that no one can touch us.
And it's not estimated to cost 24.7 billion. It's actually estimated to cost something like 175 billion. And even that has a caveat of it's probably not going to work because we're super big.
Yeah, we are doing this despite evidence saying that maybe we shouldn't invest this much money until we've researched it first. The good news is there are $12 billion for VA upgrades, which is phenomenal because, as we touched on earlier with veterans, our veterans deserve respect and our care. And this will go to upgrading VAs and hiring new people. And these are all really good things. There's 5% military salary increases. There's $250 million for AI Cyber Command. I want to point out in the middle, it's $75+ billion for border ICE increases and $150 billion for defense. Oh, this one's big. Artificial intelligence. Super scary. The changes that we've made in the last 10 years are insane. So there are differences between the House and the Senate version. So Section 43210 in the House version is an outright 10-year moratorium on enforcement of state laws regulating AI, which is scary because there's already 20 states that have created regulation bills. So and those are on deep fakes, AI used for fake content, misinformation campaigns. This could prevent a state from oversight of AI-driven rent pricing algorithms, automated healthcare decision systems, potentially leading to higher rents and reduced patient protections. We know that a lot of insurance companies use AI for making healthcare decision systems. And this, if there's no oversight of that, that could be really bad.
And a lot of times the state actually alerts the federal government, state laws alert the federal government to what they should be doing.
Exactly.
So without allowing the states to have that control, it might make the federal government less aware of what could be going wrong.
And I do want to say that this would prevent states from enforcing laws regarding AI, including those designed to prevent or detect election manipulation. If you look at this, this picture, this graph on the screen, you're going to see those dark blue states are states with laws to regulate AI deepfakes in elections. Those were enacted pre-2024. Legislation pending is that lightest color, and then that middle blue was enacted in 2024 or later. So you'll see those 20 states in there, and some more. But it's a pretty colored chart. That's pretty scary.
Means a lot of people have bills on it, and a lot of people will lose, or a lot of states will lose their power to protect their citizens.
Yeah, this is terrifying for me when you think like our healthcare, our rent, our way to survive won't be regulated. Like the AI that makes those decisions, there will be no rules, no regulation, no enforcement. It reminds me of that Will Smith movie where the robots took over. It's like, I don't know. It's AI has advanced so much. I mean, we have cars that drive themselves right now. My sister bought a car that parks itself. I can't parallel park.
I would like a car that parks
if someone's
itself.
watching me, I can't parallel park. I can only do it when there's no one around.
I'd use that.
Yeah. So okay, so differences in the Senate. So this is better
ish
question mark. Still not great. Okay, so the Senate bill is similar in that it is a 10-year pause on state and local AI regulation, but the Senate version doesn't ban it outright. So what it does is it takes away the state's broadband funding if the state enforces AI regulations. So the amount each state loses depends on how much broadband, equity, access, and deployment, or BEAD money that they get, and that can range from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. I want to add a slight note. This bill adds an extra $500 million to this $43.5 billion fund. So they're clearly incentivizing, which is scary.
But they're incentivizing you not to have AI regulations, which is a little weird.
I mean, maybe I'm hard-headed, but that would make me want to create one just to spite it.
I defy you.
I defy you.
All right, let's talk about the overall impact. We've talked about a whole bunch of stuff, and overall, what this does is we can say pretty clearly that it's going to add a whole bunch more to the federal debt. So the deficit projection for the House bill is anywhere from 2.3 trillion. The Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO, is usually very conservative in their amounts, all the way up to $3.8 trillion from the Joint Committee on Taxation.
And there are some figures that are even higher than what we see on the screen. These are like, this is the mean, this is the average.
Yeah, and these are all nonpartisan organizations. The Senate bill, you don't see any scoring on those yet, and that's because they haven't come out with them yet, because the bill isn't put together yet. And as of us taping this, the Senate is actually going to be most likely voting on a bill that's going to cost us trillions and trillions of dollars over the next 10 years without even knowing how much it's going to cost us.
There are some estimates, there are some conversations saying that the vote could be as early as this Friday, because Trump wants to sign this bill into law on the 4th of July, which is obviously next week. So if it's voted on by Friday and there's still no CBO scorings, they're going to literally be voting on this bill without knowing how much it'll cost us.
And this is not normal.
This is not normal. There's no precedent for this. In fact, we wrote a slide that didn't make the final cut, but if you want to see it, maybe we'll put it online. There is no precedent for this. The average window of time to pass a reconciliation bill is normally like double what we're seeing right here. It is not normal. But I also want to point out that it is not normal to have 1 a.m. votes. It's not normal to be having these conversations when people are sleeping. It is not normal to be pushing this so quickly to the point where representatives in the House are coming out and saying, I am so sorry, I shouldn't have voted for this. I disagree. Marjorie Taylor Greene said she would have voted no if the AI regulation portion wasn't on there. There are people that are like, oh, I didn't know the AI portion was on there. I didn't know the separations of power clause was in there. And if I did, I would have voted no. So we passed this bill in the middle of the night, unprecedentedly so. And we did so without even reading the bill.
And Mitch McConnell kind of said it the clearest of everyone. He said, we're just going to kind of have to deal with it.
Well, Jody Ernst said everyone dies, therefore it's acceptable, right? So
everyone does die.
Everyone does die. So I just wanted to point, touch base that for whatever reason, I am not going to imply anything. I am not going to assign purpose or intention because that would be very partisan. But it is not normal to be seeing what we're seeing.
It's not normal to rush it.
Yep.
It's to not have the CBO score has never happened before, because senators should want to understand how it's going to impact what happens going forward.
And our representatives, our electeds, should have enough time to be able to review the package and make recommendations. The entire way our system works is you read the bill and you can propose amendments and you can do markups in committee. But if you haven't read the bill, how do you propose changes on something you haven't read?
And most importantly, get feedback from the people who live in your state.
Exactly. Talk to people that are involved. Talk to your stakeholders. That is how it's supposed to work. But this, because they have that July 4th deadline, they're pushing it through.
But there's actually not a July 4th deadline. Like,
not
they can
technically.
go further.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't need fireworks after it happens. You
Yeah.
can keep going. You can explain the bill to your constituents. You can have town halls about it. You can listen to people's concerns. We're just pushing it through.
Yeah.
And there's something very unusual about that we should at least highlight. So let's go ahead and talk about where our cuts are come from and where the increases in deficits are. So decreases in debts, in deficits is SNAP cuts. The Pell Grants and loan cuts are only in the House bill, but in the Senate bill, they still have $300 billion in cuts because they tighten loan repayment so much. Medicaid cuts in the Senate version are even worse. Clean energy incentives, eliminating those are about comparable. CFPB cuts will not be there, so yay for that. But that's kind of where our priorities are not. Okay, we are going to focus less on giving people money to get enough food, on making sure that people can repay their student loans, on Medicaid, on clean energy. And then let's talk about where it's increasing deficits. We're putting a lot more, about $200 billion into defense and the border wall. And the big one is extending those tax cuts, okay, which is around, and this is CBO estimates, it's around $3.8 trillion to extend those tax cuts.
All right. So if there's one word that I want you to keep in mind right now, it's this. It's risk. Not politics, not partisanship, risk. And that's because that's what this bill, this one big beautiful bill is built on. Not a foundation of certainty or accountability, but a tangle of dangerous gambles with very real stakes for people like you and me. So let's start with the big picture, our economy. This bill takes on trillions in new spending and debt, and at the very same time, it picks fights with global partners that we rely on to buy our bonds. That's like maxing out your credit card while threatening to block your bank account. It's not just reckless, it's risky. And if those countries walk away, if those investors pull back, the fiscal crisis that follows won't hit headlines first. It'll hit our paychecks, our retirement accounts, our grocery bills. And it doesn't stop there. The bill increases risk to families. It slashes programs like Medicaid, SNAP, and other support systems that millions of working parents, disabled people, veterans, and low income children rely on. So ask yourself, what happens when those programs are gone? Just as this bill's, new cuts, and just as we've seen tariffs and executive actions risk triggering a recession. I mean, what happens if that happens? What happens when prices go up and paychecks go down, but there's no safety net left? We stop calling it hard times and we start calling it what it is: survival. This bill doesn't protect us from that, it accelerates it. It bakes risk into the system and hands the bill to the people with the least cushion. So, no, this isn't about line items or legal language. It's about risk. Whose risk increases, whose risk disappears, and whether our government is willing to gamble with people's lives and call it policy. The stakes here aren't theoretical, they're deeply personal, and they deserve our full attention. And I just want to say, this bill cuts taxes mostly for richer people, mostly for people making over $500,000. It cuts Medicaid and food stamps and allows ACA subsidies to lapse or expire. I want to say that it's very exact, it's very precise. There's $1.1 trillion in tax cuts for people who make more than $500,000 a year. And there's exactly $1.1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and food stamps, making it a direct transfer from people who cannot afford food and medical care to people who can afford to fly wherever they want in the world. So what happens now? You're going to see some really pretty arrows on the screen. It is a timeline here. So what happens now? We're in the Senate, and we've done committee markups for the most part. We're kind of in the budget committee compilation portion, but we have seen some bird rule challenges. Again, the parliamentarian has already issued, bird rule challenge, I guess, verdict. I don't know what the word would be. She has removed quite a
She's removed some
she's
things
quite a few
that
provisions that violated the bird rule.
violated the bird rule.
She's removed quite a few. So, right now they're putting everything into that final reconciliation package. They're trying to keep in mind what the parliamentarian has said. But, right now, just because that happened, it doesn't mean that, it's over. So there's two routes that the Senate can go. All eyes are on Leader Thune to see what he does. Now, there's two kind of avenues that you can take. Number one, the leader in the Senate, which is John Thune right now, he can ignore it and say, I don't care, and move on like it's another Tuesday. Or he can put it up to a vote, and with a 50-vote majority, the ruling is overruled. And so we will see. Now, Senator Thune has, kind of already come out and said that he's not going to overrule it, that he's going to respect it. But again, that doesn't mean that another senator or leader won't bring it up for a vote. Now, from there, we'll see floor debate and amendments. So the full Senate will come together to debate the bill. Again, they can point of order and make bird rule challenges. They can, try to mitigate some of the harm in this bill by proposing floor amendments. And they will rigorously debate. Again, because this is a reconciliation bill, there's no filibustering. So that's really important to mention here. No one's going to be able to choreograph this and go up for a full day to make a stand, even though I wish they could. There will be a debate and there will be amendments made, and we will see if any of the harm is mitigated or if anything is removed. And then from there, it'll be a final vote and the simple majority wins. Okay, but I don't want anyone to be discouraged that this is it and it's over, and it's not. So there are things that we can do now. You can call the Capitol switchboard at any time. Call that number 202-224-3121. Ask for your senators, Senator Scott and Senator Moody here in Florida. Our senators' job is to vote how their constituents want them to vote. So tell them, be calm, be courteous, and be clear. There are many, many scripts you can use online. We put one here on the screen for you. Essentially, just say what your name is, where you live. You can tell them your occupation. Personally, no one's ever asked me that, but you can give them, where you live. I live in, so and so Florida, and this is why I care about the bill. And from there, you can ask to meet with the senator, although good luck because they have a very busy schedule. You can email them, or you can, be on the phone and ask them to vote no. You can ask them to vote no on the big, beautiful bill unless critical provisions are amended regarding any of the things that you care about. So, climate and energy, uneven distribution of tax cuts, Medicaid cuts, border policy, AI rules, whatever you disagree with, whatever you don't like, you can ask them at that point in time, at that juncture, to say no to the bill, unless they make those critical provisions, more fair or better. You can also ask them to make amendments on those things. But express that we need a full debate, we need public hearings, we need revisions before we pass this bill. So you can email them, you can call them, you can meet with them if you're close. But the important thing is that you ask them to vote no, or you ask them to amend it. You can also ask them to enact the Byrd Rule. So you can ask your senator to use the Byrd Rule to challenge provisions that don't comply with reconciliation guidelines. And these include, limitations on judicial enforcement, artificial intelligence, state bans, defunding Planned Parenthood, and some that we didn't even get a chance to cover. So, the increased immigration application fees, or even the gun silencer tax repeal. If there is something in this bill that really strikes a chord with you, please, 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 stand up and talk about it. So regardless of the outcome of this particular bill, democracy is an active word, and it demands participation. We must fight for it. We must safeguard it. Now, before we close, I want to say a couple of things. Like, let's first just take a collective breath, because that was a lot.
That was a lot.
It was so much at one time. So, like, deep breath in, deep breath out. There's a lot in this bill, and it's okay if you're leaving us right now with more questions than you came in with. That's not a failure. That's progress. Democracy isn't clean and tidy. It's a group project with no end date and infinite group chats. It's basically a group project where no one has read the same instructions and half the team forgot snacks. But we are in this together. And the most important thing is that you showed up tonight. The most important thing that happened wasn't it wasn't a policy breakdown. It wasn't a panelist zinger. It was you. You showed up. You asked hard questions. You stayed engaged. You listened. And maybe, just maybe, when you log out of this video, you leave a little bit more ready to speak up, to dig in, or to help someone else understand what's going on. So if something you heard tonight fired you up, confused you, gave you goosebumps, or made you side-eye the ceiling, we want you to take that and do something with it. Email your reps, talk to your coworkers or your neighbors or your friends or your family, start a group chat, hold a sign, do an interpretive dance with a poster, do something. So, and finally, just thank you truly for bringing, your presence here, and for taking the time to hear us out. Thank you for being here and for caring, for wanting to know more and wanting to be involved. That is how democracy works. It works when all of us have a voice, when all of us are at the table, and all of us have a voice in the legislation that we put forward.
Because it's about us. That's what democracy is.
It is. So stay curious, stay active, and let's keep talking about it, America.